getting to Doctor Who, do you recall the first time that you watched it, and do you have a doctor?
Two totally different questions. Yes. The first Doctor Who I ever saw, and I can remember this so vividly, I would have been 3. And it was the regeneration of William Hartnell into Patrick Troughton. I have no recollection at all of the first 3 episodes of The 10th Planet. I would have watched them because my brothers would have made me watch them. But I vividly remember what I thought, because bear in mind, we're talking 1966. We're talking really old TVs, you know, that take 10 minutes to warm up and have a slightly curved screen, and it's all very dark and flickery. I remember as a kid, what I thought was 3 old age pensioners, all of whom looked like my grandma. And then one of them falls down. And then something happens, and then the theme music comes up. And I remember that shot for shot for shot. And I didn't know really what I was watching, but I was hooked by that music. So next week, when that music started again, I thought, that's that thing with the old person that did something funny. Oh, look, he's not there anymore. And boom, I watched Doctor Who every week from that point onwards, or nearly every week. I don't remember a great deal of it. I remember snatches of the Troughton stuff until you get sort of to season 6, and not 6, 5. And then I'm really remembering from Evil of the Daleks onwards, my memory of Doctor Who is pretty good. And then when Pertwee comes along, that's my life. And so to answer the second part of your question, Pertwee is my doctor.
Okay.
Pertwee is God, as far as I'm concerned. Those 5 years of Doctor Who is the best television in the history of the universe.
Wow.
Apart
Okay.
from Claws of Axos. Claws of Axos I could live without. Everything else, perfect.
Okay. So John Pertwee is God in Doctor Who.
Yep.
That's pretty funny, because I've actually referred to you as God in Doctor Who. Respectfully, of
I think
course.
it's slightly truer to say that of John than it certainly would ever be of me. But no, he's the man. He's, and of course, I find this very hard to explain sometimes. And of course, this is a very British thing, because you didn't have Doctor Who in America at that time. You got it all in this mass lump of Tom Baker at the beginning. But when I was at school, so Pertwee, 70 through to 74. So when I was at school, and the early days, couple of years of Tom, I suppose it's true, the weird kids were the ones who didn't watch Doctor Who.
Really?
And yeah, everyone watched Doctor Who. Boys, girls, everyone watched Doctor Who. And then as you get into the later Tom Baker era, somewhere in Britain, this shift happens. And suddenly the weird kids are the ones that still watch Doctor Who, because it's all gone a bit rubbish. But that golden period of Pertwee and the first 2 or 3 years of Tom, you were the weird one if you didn't love Doctor Who. And I think it's almost like a switch is flicked. I hate to say this about Graham Williams as a producer, but I think there's a switch is flicked halfway through Graham Williams's first year on Doctor Who, which is Fang Rock through to Invasion Time. And that is the point. And it kind of perhaps ties in with Star Wars, I don't know. But that is the point where it suddenly went normal people, nerds. And I never understood why, but I was very happy to sit in the corner and go, hello, big nerd. So I can tell you, so when I moved to my new school after the terrible time I'd had at my original secondary school, and they were like, as you do when you really want to humiliate someone on their first day in your new school, because I didn't come at the start of term because I'd been filming, they sit in the middle of the assembly in front of the entire school of kids and teachers. Headmaster goes, we're joined today by a new pupil, Gary. Gary, tell us about yourself. And I'm like a rabbit in headlights. And I so clearly remember going, I've just been making a TV series called The Phoenix and the Carpet, which is on at the moment. And some people went, oh. And I went, and I'm a massive Doctor Who fan. And you could have had tumbleweeds rolling through. I thought, oh, I've made a mistake there. But no, over the next couple of days, people come up and go, oh, I really loved the last week's Doctor Who. That was really brilliant. Oh, isn't Leela fantastic? And I thought, yeah, it's weird that the first thing I say is I'm an actor, and the second thing I say is I'm a Doctor Who fan. I didn't say anything else after that. So they're the two defining things of me aged 13. It's acting and Doctor Who. And I suppose, yeah, that was the point where Doctor Who wasn't considered cool. It had just turned, if you like, at that point. But I didn't care because, you know, I love Doctor Who. So something they didn't like it, didn't matter. I did. And I was right. They were wrong. Simple as that.
Now, when you go back to when your brothers forced you to watch Doctor Who with them with that old fuzzy black and white television set that took 10 minutes to warm up, sounds like hours when I was a kid. Do you happen to recall anything at all about any of the episodes that were unfortunately wiped and are still missing?
Random snatches, seriously, random snatches. Remember the Space Pirates quite well, which is why I think I have in the back of my head, I like the Space Pirates, because I remember watching it at the time and thinking it was good fun. I do remember, and I only can pick this one out because I've mentioned this a lot over the last few years since we did the animation, but I can clearly remember being scared to have a bath during Fury from the Deep, because you get in a bath and there's soap, which looks a bit like the foam in Fury from the Deep. And I just remember being, what would I have been, 6, 7 years old, thinking, I want to get in a bath, thank you very much. I've just seen what happens to people who play with foam and seaweed. I remember that quite clearly. I remember moments of the Abominable Snowmen. I'm never sure whether I remember the Abominable Snowmen or I remember Web of Fear. I'm never quite sure which of those I remember. But I certainly, of course, having seen them now, it's like, well, once you see something, you lose, I think, that sort of, oh, I remember snatches of it. Because suddenly when you've got the whole thing, you're like, oh, well, it's just all brilliant and marvelous. And that's probably what I watched. Yeah, I mean, I suppose of all the stories that are missing, which of course with Troughton, they're mostly before Evil of the Daleks. I remember Evil of the Daleks really well, particularly the big fight at the end of the episode. I think Space Pirates is the one that sticks in my memory, and I don't know why, except design-wise, I think to a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, it looked really quite exciting, you know, and I think, oh, that was good. So I do remember that quite well. And knowing it was called Space Pirates, that's the other thing, is I'm fairly certain I didn't know that Evil of the Daleks was called Evil of the Daleks, or Fury from the Deep was called Fury from the Deep. But I did know the Space Pirates was called the Space Pirates, because somehow to me it was like, Doctor Who is set in space and these are pirates. Therefore, that's why it's called the Space Pirates. Okay. And I remember the War Games happening and being blown away by the idea of this story of the War Games. So that was the point where I started taking notice of story titles. I don't think I'd worried about story titles. It was all just Doctor Who every week. And I don't remember there being breaks between seasons. For me, Doctor Who was on constantly. Certainly during the black and white stuff, it was just like, it was always there. And then when I fell in love with Pertwee, and Pertwee was suddenly, we talked about it at school, suddenly then you noticed that it wasn't on anymore. And it was like, we were all distraught by the end of sort of Inferno. And it's like, gotta wait another year for Doctor. And of course, when you're 7 or 8 years old, those 6 or 7 months between seasons are 6 or 7 years. You know, it's just when's Doctor Who coming back? When's Doctor Who coming back? You didn't understand seasons, you didn't understand months, you didn't understand that Doctor Who started in January every year. All you could think was, why isn't Doctor Who on? So again, back to the listings magazine, every time, first thing I would do is go to Saturday to see if Doctor Who was back. And when it wasn't, this was incredibly upsetting that there was no Doctor Who on Saturday. Very, very resentful of the fact that Doctor Who was not on 52 weeks a year.
Now, do you happen
that answered any of your questions?
No, that's very interesting, and that's kind of making me wonder if I should ask you about the wilderness years. But before that, do you happen to remember the first regeneration that you saw, and did you understand what was going on?
Yeah, so I didn't, obviously I saw the Partners of Troughton, didn't understand a word of it. Yes, Troughton to Pertwee, I absolutely got. I realized that at the end of this, the man who I thought was falling down a well, when I next saw him, was going to look different. I don't think we weren't familiar enough with the concept of regeneration that I didn't sit down and think, oh, we haven't seen what he looks like. It was just like, oh yes, next time when Doctor Who comes back, he will look different. And then one day suddenly there was this listings magazine with John Pertwee on the front going, I am Doctor Who. And I was like, oh, he's now Doctor Who. That means it's back. Oh yes, there's Saturday. Look, Doctor Who's back. And it's played by this man with white hair, which wasn't white at all. So I understood the concept of regeneration, yeah, from Troughton to Pertwee onwards.
Okay. Okay. Now, tell us about 1992 to 1995. This is when you did some comics editing at Doctor Who magazine.
So yes, so Alan Mackenzie got me to write for the magazine back in 1983, and I had stayed writing for it and doing reviews and lots of things for DWM all the way through, gone through lots of different editors. And then I'd gone freelance. I'd left the BBC. I left the BBC in 1991 or 1990, I can't remember which. And I was freelance for a while, which meant I wasn't earning very much money because I don't really know what I was freelancing at. And then one day, completely out of the blue, John Freeman, who was my editor at Doctor Who magazine at the time, said to me, do you want to come on staff? Do you want a full-time job? And I went, yes. Work on Doctor Who magazine. Good, yeah. He said, good, because I'm going to stop being the editor and I think you'd be quite good at taking over from me. And I was like, I've edited a fanzine and I don't think that's quite the same as editing Doctor Who magazine, but okay, if you think I can do this. So I went in and met the big boss at Marvel, Paul Neary, and he liked me. So I got the job. And I started on a Thursday. Don't ask me why it was a Thursday, but it was. And I went in, and then on the Friday, John Freeman said to me, okay, so how do you feel about, your first 2 days here? And I was like, oh, it's been very exciting. I haven't understood a word of anything anyone said to me, but it all looks very exciting. He said, good, I'm going to America for 2 weeks. So you need to finish this issue off and get it to the printers. See you in 2 weeks. Bye. And it's gone. And I was like, rabbit caught in headlights, going, I have no idea what to do. So I got to know everyone in Marvel very, very quickly and said, help. And I got the magazine put together and it came out on time. And John Freeman came back, was very proud and went, well done. That was great. And he said, yeah, I'm moving on in 2 issues time. So we'll work together on the next couple of issues. And then after that, it's all yours. I'll be upstairs if you want me for sort of a bit of a guiding hand, which he was brilliant at. And frequently stopped me making some terrible mistakes. And then I was the editor of Doctor Who magazine for a very short space of time. I only did it for, I think, 2 and a bit years. One of the shortest running editors of DWM ever. But they were great fun. And of course, I had the 30th anniversary. And that was amazing. We're anniversary for a show that's no longer on air. That was the great freeing thing for me for Doc, whereas John had suffered all the way through the last few years of the show. So that constant combating all the other magazines and things to get stuff into Doctor Who magazine about the filming and the locations and blah, blah. I had none of that. Doctor was dead. So I had a reference magazine as far as I looked at it. Everything I did was looking backwards. I didn't ever have to worry about looking forwards. I wasn't fighting anyone else for photographs. I wasn't fighting anyone else for interesting news. We were the only thing out there by 1993 when the 30th anniversary happened. And so I remember going to BBC Enterprises, as it was then, and having a meeting with people who I knew about this 30th anniversary of Doctor Who, and them saying, we don't know what to do. We need to celebrate the 30th anniversary. And there was going to be Dimensions in Time, and then that failed. And then there was going to be the Children in Need thing, and that happened. There was a big convention that they organized with the Dwaz, which was superb. But everything else they wanted to do, they didn't have the expertise. So they came to me as the editor of Doctor Who magazine. So I've got an award upstairs presented to BBC Worldwide for campaign of the year or something for one of the early VHS sets, which they gave to me because it had all been my idea, and I'd overseen it on behalf of the BBC. So the BBC got the plaudits, but they kept coming to me. There was a 30th anniversary logo that got designed. That was designed by Paul Vise in My Designer on DWM, because no one at the BBC, there was no one there to do it. And that made everything really nice, because it gave the magazine and Marvel and everything about DWM huge importance for that year. And so that was a fun time to be running Doctor Who magazine. And then 1995, I left. Yes, I left Marvel in June 95. And other people took over DWM and made it 3 times better than I ever had. But I loved working. I've always said, no disrespect to Russell or anyone else, I have always said that if you ask me what my favorite job was in my life, the actual thing of working for Marvel and doing Doctor Who magazine remains my favorite period of my life professionally as a job. The last 2 or 3 months when it all went to pot and I got kicked out, I could live without. But for the most part, working for Marvel UK and editing Doctor Who magazine is the best job I've ever had. Loved it.
Wow.
Loved it.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Wonderful.
Fun to go to work.
And I guess that there's a saying that you need to love what you do, because you're going to be doing a lot of it. It sounds like you really loved that.
I did. Doctor Who magazine was just every day. I mean, I'm sure there were days where this isn't true, but my memory is that every day of going to work, certainly for the first 2.5 years, was a pleasure, was a real fun pleasure. I just enjoyed myself. And I think, I look back and go, yeah, and I was turning 30, obviously, because I'm the same age as the show. And that's a good age to be in charge of something like that and have that little bit of independence and that little bit of power. Power's the wrong word. Authority, that's an even worse word. But to be in charge of something like Doctor Who magazine, that was a lucky person to be getting that. And that was, all thanks to John Freeman. I was very lucky. Again, right place, right time, I suppose. But I just enjoyed it. And the company was good. Marvel UK at that point under Paul Neary and Mike Hobson, particularly when he came over from America, it was a good time to be in the company. And then when Panini took over, it wasn't. It was a terrible time to work for them, and I got kicked out. But that's the last 2 months, and the previous 3 years, or whatever it was, 2.5 years, fantastic. Loved it. Worked with amazingly wonderful people. That was the reason Marvel UK worked. It's because the people were all so good and so nice.
Okay, now you mentioned that you had done some editing before with your own fanzine.
Yes, Sharda.
What was the name of that?
Sharda. In those days, we all took our fanzine names from television stories. So I decided that, I'd do my fanzine named after a show that never got made. So I had Sharda. Kind of contrary person I was right from the very beginning. And I did 18 issues or 19 issues, I think, of Sharda between 1980 and 1983, I think. Or no, 84. My last issue was in 84. So yeah, I did 19 issues over 3.5, 4 years. And the reason I stopped really was I'd started writing for DWM back in 83. And I just couldn't do them both. So the fanzine went and I focused on getting paid for being a Doctor Who fan.
Okay.
It's always tacky to talk about money, but the fact is that here am I 60 years old, and I would still describe myself as a professional Doctor Who fan. I don't consider myself a professional working in Doctor Who. I'm a professional Doctor Who fan because I'm still a fan and will always be a fan. And you can't get rid of that fan gene. You can't just wash it away. So you're a Doctor Who fan all your life. And I'm one of a very small, lucky number of people who, since 1983, 40 years ago, I've been constantly paid to be a Doctor Who fan. And and I love that fact. I never, I never hide away from the word fan. I attach the word fan at the end of everything. I am a fan of Doctor Who. I'm a fan who writes books. I'm a fan that ran an audio production company. I'm a fan that did all of these things because first and foremost, I'm a Doctor Who fan, and I'm just lucky that someone paid me money to be one.
Wonderful. Okay. Now, the wilderness years. You
Hmm.
have you. I would like to know what you did to keep yourself occupied, which we know part now. You were at Doctor Who magazine, but was there anything else that you did in Doctor Who fandom to keep yourself occupied? And was there ever a point where you didn't think it would come back?
Oh, well, to take the last part first. Absolutely, never imagined for one moment it's come back. Died in 1989, all the way through Marvel. Absolutely convinced Doctor Who would never come back. I wrote my first Virgin novel while I was at Marvel. I wrote my second Virgin novel while I was at Marvel as well, actually. Never thought Doctor Who would come back. And then, so I left Marvel in 95, and in 96, I wrote the TV movie novelization. Suddenly, Doctor Who would come back. By 1997, Doctor Who wasn't going to come back again, so I never thought that was going to happen again. And that's why, so in 97, Jason and I approached the BBC and said, we've had this really good idea for doing Doctor Who on audio. And they went, no, go away, leave us alone. So we went off and did Bernie Summerfield, and they came back, they called us back and said, we've had this great idea to do Doctor Who on audio. I think you'll find that we had that, but never mind. And that was the start of Big Finish. Off we went. And that was that took me through the wilderness years, because if you think of the wilderness years is sort of like 1990 to 2004 or 2005 really, because the show didn't come back until at least 2005. A very large percentage of that for me is Big Finish. Big Finish for me started in 97 and ended for me in 2006. So I was doing Big Finish all the way through that. And I was writing books, and I was doing non-Doctor Who stuff. I was writing books on, I was going over to New Zealand and working on Lord of the Rings books for the movies and things like that. So I had quite an active time during the wilderness years. And then, so I did Big Finish for 8 years. And then one day I was asked to go to Cardiff, and I've been here ever since.
Okay,
By then,
very
there was
good.
no wilderness years. By then, there had been a season of a TV show with Christopher Eccleston in it.
Okay. Now, the before Big Finish started, there were some stories that were called the audio visuals, and
Yeah,
it's my understanding of those that this was a group of fans that got together and started making their own audio dramas, which then of course it became Big Finish. Were you in this group of fans that were doing that?
yeah. So audio visuals, 1984, we started. Me and Bill Baggs, we created it. We set it up, and we did that through until 1991. Bill left. Bill had gone halfway through. I'm the only person that was there from the very beginning to the very end. Briggsy was there, John Ainsworth was there, Jim Mortimer was there, Nigel Fairs, all these people. We were all part of audio visuals, but Bill was the sort of driving force behind it. But he and I invented it one afternoon, walking down the pier, not the pier, walking down the side of the beach on Milford upon Haven. And we just went, why don't we do Doctor Who on audio? I think, had I done, no, of course I hadn't done my first novel. No, of course I haven't, it's 10 years before. For some reason, I think I was still doing Shada. I might have just given up doing Shada. And it was just the idea of doing something new. And so we said together, let's do this. Let's make this happen. And so we got a group of people together and we recorded the first play, and it wasn't particularly good. And then we met Nick Briggs. Well, I think Bill probably knew Nick Briggs already, and we got Nick Briggs in and we said, come and be our doctor. And I think he was like, what the hell is going on here? And then suddenly it all clicked. And so between 84 and 1991, we did 4 seasons of audiovisual stuff. Taught ourselves, again, it's the self-teaching thing. We taught ourselves how to do audio. None of us really had a clue. I mean, Nick had been playing around with audio himself for many, many years. But, he bought a Porter studio. I didn't know what a Porter studio was, but he bought a Porter studio which had 4 tracks on it, or might have had 8 tracks on it. Maybe the second one had 8 tracks, and learning what you can do. And it was watching Nick at work was amazing. You thought, oh my God, you're creating the stuff, and all the people who were involved, we were all learning as we were going along. We started off with a cassette tape recorder, and by the end of it, we're recording stuff in the studios of the BBC, completely on the QT and totally illegitimately. But we were using BBC studios to record our plays in, and it was just like, oh, wow, we taught ourselves it. So by the time, so that was 91, that finished. Well, Big Finish didn't come along, I say, till Jason and I talked about it in 96. 97, we really got it thrown. So there's a 6-year gap between the end of Audiovisuals and start Big Finish. You can't really say that one led to the other. It's just that group of people I brought into Big Finish straight away. The first person that Jason and I went to about Big Finish was Nick. It's like, this is obvious, isn't it? You've got to have Nick here. So the origins, if you like, of Big Finish certainly start with Audiovisuals, but there's no running together. There's 6 years in between there where we weren't doing any audio at all and didn't think about it. And it was only just that one day I suddenly said to Jason, I want to do audio again because it's a brilliant medium and it works for Doctor Who. Let's ask the BBC if we can have the rights to Doctor Who. So we did, and they said no. So we went and did Bernie Summerfield. And because of the Bernie Summerfield stuff the BBC then heard, they called us in and said, let's do Doctor Who on audio. Because that change had happened, that when we asked the first time, the McGann movie was still kind of like, oh, this is the start of a new era for Doctor Who. Well, by the time we had done the first couple of Bernie Summerfields, the BBC were, yeah, that didn't happen, did it? So they weren't as precious about Doctor Who. They suddenly went, oh, palm Doctor Who off on the first people that come along. Oh, these people want to make audios, let them do it. And we made a success of it. We just, proved it could be done. I always say the biggest thing I think that's come out of Big Finish isn't Big Finish. I mean, Big Finish is this huge monolithic thing now, but what there wasn't when we started Big Finish was other people professionally doing audio drama other than Radio 4 over here. There was no Audible. There was, now every Tom, Dick and Harry that has a TV show sits down and does an audio. The amount of fan audios out there, which are fantastic stuff. But, there's Star Trek audios, there's Stargate audios. Everyone seems to have their own. And then there's Audible that came along and is now this phenomenally huge, successful worldwide company. They didn't exist when Big Finish was starting. And I think we, in some tiny way, showed a lot of people, oh, you can do audio drama that really is using the medium and isn't just a load of people standing around a microphone reading lines, which is what audio drama had been on radio for donkey's years, because it was lazy. It really was lazy. And we went, no, we do this the different way. You do it post-production like you would do television. You record all the dialogue and then you do everything in post, and you build soundscapes and you use music and you use effects. And a lot of people sat up and went, oh, these guys are doing this. We can do this as well. And suddenly there is now audio is a world. And it wasn't there in 1997, 98 when we first launched Doctor Who. And I think that is something I'm very proud of. I'm sure Audible would turn around and say that's a load of old rubbish and we're always going to do a Big Finish. It just happened to be that we did it 3 years afterwards, but we'd been thinking about it for 10 years. But I don't believe them. I do think that Big Finish was responsible for this resurgence of audio drama and became accepted along the mainstream. And now look at it. I mean, I haven't had anything to do with Big Finish for donkey's years, but look how huge it is now. Look how respected it is now. Now it gets column inches in newspapers and digital spy on television. Every time Big Finish do something, it makes the headlines. I never did it when I was running Big Finish. We never made any headlines. The last thing we wanted was really newspapers picking up on us. But it's fantastic. What a thing to have, for me personally, what a thing to have created or co-created with Jason, that is now this fantastic, huge thing. It's brilliant.
So in the beginning, you said, let there be light. Or no, that's a different one.
That's the other goal.
In the beginning, You were walking down a pier and said, let's make Big Finish audios. Or I'm
No,
sorry, let's
let's
make
make
Doctor Who on
let's make
audio.
audio visuals. Yeah, let's make Doctor Who on audio. We'd had the Pescatons, you know, and I'd always loved that as a kid. I loved the Pescatons record in 19 whatever it was, 76. And I used to think I was the only person in the world that ever bought that LP, because none of my other friends were remotely interested. It was a record. You records are for music. You can't put it on and listen to Doctor Who stories. And I played my vinyl version of the Pescatons to death. I must have worn out about 3 copies of that.
On vinyl?
I think the Pescatons, technically not the greatest thing in the world, a lot of potential, but to listen to it, it's like watching an episode of Doctor Who for me. The Pescatons, it hits me inside. It gets my nostalgia. It gets my everything flowing, because it for me is the start of that love of audio drama for me.
The Pescatons was the very first Doctor Who audio drama, wasn't it?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I think it was certainly the first commercially released one.
Okay. Now, with Big Finish, you also wrote some stories for some hardback anthologies that they had published, I believe, in the early aughts. Yes, sir. Short trips.
I certainly edited 2 of them. Did I write anything? I wrote the linking material for them. But I never wrote any for myself. I think then, possibly after I'd left Big Finish, Joe Lidster asked me to write one. I think I did one for the Centenarian, and I might have done a couple. Oh no, because Jack asked me to do one about Adric. That's right. And I was still at Big Finish then. So yeah, I probably did maybe 3 or 4 short stories. They were always fun. Short stories are great. I love writing short stories. It's an art. It's a really difficult thing to do. People just think, oh, you write things. You can be a writer, and you can. Anyone can be a writer, as long as you've got a modicum of talent. But there is a world of difference between writing a 75,000 word novel, or a 55,000 word novel, or a 20,000 word novella, or a 5,000 word short story. They are not the same thing at all. They are all take different disciplines and different skills and different ways of telling story. And short story was not something I was enormously familiar with. So that was a bit of a trial and error for me doing those early short trips. I love them. I love short fiction like that, because it stretches you, because you've got to tell a story in 5,000 words. Well, when you're an old waffler like me, your first 3,000 words are just setting up the first scene. And then you think, oh, 2,000 words left to finish the bloody story. So you finish it off and you go, right, that's now 10,500 words. I've got to edit it down to 5,000 words. You very quickly learn after that to be a lot more economic. And the next time you write one, you write 5,000 words and that's all. But, it's a whole different medium. It's writing, even prose writing, is not just one thing. Each division of it takes a different kind of discipline and a different kind of skill. Is not really the right word. It's just discipline. There's this blanket idea that people say, oh, you write things, because they think that writing a book and writing a script and writing a journalist article and writing something that's 5,000 words or 50,000 words or 100,000 words or 500 words is all the same thing. And it isn't. In the same way, to be honest with you, that an audio script and a TV script and a film script are not the same thing. They all have different importances, and importance is the wrong word. Writer can't actually use the right words. They all have different aspects that make them unique. A film is very different from television. The language of film is very different from the language of television, and the length of time you've got to film, the length of time you have in a TV script. An audio script, completely different, because you've got no visuals. So all of these things are all different disciplines within this blanket of writing. And I love talking about writing, as you can tell. But I do, always try and say to people who say, I want to be a writer. You say, well, what do you want to write? Because they're all different. There is no such thing as a writer. And the worst thing is when someone says, oh, I want to write Doctor Who. And you go, right, do you want to be a writer or do you want to write Doctor Who? Because again, that's 2 totally different things. One is actually wanting a career, and one is, I want to be famous for doing something in Doctor Who. And that second one, anyone that comes up and says, all I want to do is write Doctor Who, ain't going to get there, because you have to be a writer before you can write Doctor Who.
Okay, very good. Now, touching on Big Finish for the last time today, some people feel that there are two major eras of Big Finish, the Gary Russell years and then present, which are clearly separated by when the covers changed to where there used to be a black bar on off to the side, and then
Yeah, they kept my design for about 6 months, I think, and then changed it. But yes.
okay. Now, I believe you said that you left Big Finish because somebody asked you to come to Cardiff. Who was that, and why did they want you in Cardiff?
Oh, God knows why they wanted me in Cardiff. I'm sure they regretted it for the rest of their lives. But yeah, so I was, one of my freelance gigs was doing a thing called Doctor Who: The Inside Story that had come about because Doctor Who Confidential had come down to one of our recordings at Big Finish, one of the Peter Davison stories we were doing, and I got chatting with Gillen, who was the producer of Doctor Who Confidential. And I think there must have been some talk up in Cardiff that somebody was going to do this book about the making of the new series. And I think Gillen must have mentioned my name because they knew I'd written. And Russell was like, I know Gary anyway, so that's quite good. Boom, boom, boom. Suddenly I was writing this book. So that required me to come up to Cardiff every so often and interview people, which I did over a long period of time. And one of those people, obviously, I interviewed, although in this case it was in Manchester, was Russell. And I waited till the end of the book, really, before I interviewed Russell, because I wanted to get everyone else done so I could say to Russell, right, this person says this happened, this person thinks this person reckons that this happened because of this, tell me the truth. And at the end of the interview with Russell, which I will tell you went on, you think I'm going on now, the interview I did with Russell, I was so asking him questions, I don't know how he didn't kill me. I think I was in 4.5 hours. And at the end of it, we finished the table and we're having a cup of tea. And he said, you know, what do you want to do with your life? Are you happy at Big Finish? Do you want to do Big Finish forever? And of course, I'd been at Big, but set it up. I'd run it fundamentally by myself. It was myself and Ian Farrington in an office in London. We kind of ran Big Finish. Nick was there using it as well because he was doing a lot of editing and his music there. But in terms of running the company and keeping it ticking over, it was just me and Ian. And that's exhausting. That really was. After 8 years, I was like, oh. So I was quite happy to say to Russell, no, I don't think I'm going to stay at Big Finish forever. I always wanted to be Terrance Dicks. I always thought being a script editor would be, you know, the best job in the world. And that's just what I said to him. Anyway, I went back to London, and a couple of days later, I was back in Cardiff interviewing someone else. And this man who I'd never met before suddenly said from an office, oh, Gary, you're Gary Russell, yes. I said, yes, can you come and have a chat? I don't know who you are. And it was a lovely man called Matthew Bush, who later became the producer of the first series of Sarah Jane. And he was just chatting to me about writing the Inside Story, and he was asking me about Big Finish. And I thought, you're not a Doctor Who fan, so it's quite interesting. And we were talking about it and everything. And then he started talking about the things that script editors do. And I realized that it's kind of quite different from the way Terrance Dicks and Eric Saywood used to be script editors. Modern script editing is not the same job. And I said, oh, right, okay. And this conversation went on, and he said, so, you know, do you want to be a script editor? Is that really what you want? Do you want to come and, you know, get into television today? And I was like, yeah, I really do. And he went, okay, can you start on Monday?
Oh.
And I went, I'm sorry, was this a job interview? And he went, it's sort of become one, hasn't it, really? He said, no, Russell and Julie think you'd be really good for the show. They want you here. They need someone who's got the knowledge and background of Doctor Who. Part of the job will be looking after all the stuff from BBC Worldwide and improving the books and the comics and all of this, and Big Finish, ironically, you know, and just being that sort of thing, and also doing some script editing at that point, they said, on Doctor Who itself. Well, when someone says that to you and you hear the magic words, Russell and Julie want you, you do kind of go, there is no way, there's no way out of that, really, is there? So as I said at the very beginning of this interview, I literally stood there and went, yes. That what? And he said, you're going to have to move to Cardiff. And I was like, yes. When? You know, oh, Monday. Okay. And so I had to go back to, I remember this was a Wednesday. So Thursday morning, I'm back in London in the Big Finish offices, and I phoned Jason Haig-Ellery up. And I said, I've got some news for you. And he was like, oh, God, don't tell me Russell's offered you a job. And I was like, funny you should say that. And Jason was like, oh, you're kidding me. And I went, yeah, he has. He's offered me a job. And I've said yes. And Jason was like, okay, how long? When are you planning to leave Big Finish? I went, I start on Monday and this is Thursday. And bless him, Jason was like, no, that's really quite brilliant. But I'm sure inside he was going, oh, Tim. But then I agreed with the BBC was I do 3 days in Cardiff on Doctor Who, and I could have 2 days in London on Big Finish, so I could wrap a lot of stuff up, and there wouldn't be that instant, oh my God, we've got to find someone. So it gave Jason time to sort of, I mean, both Jason and I knew he was going to turn around to Nick Briggs and say, take over from Gary. Nick will tell you there was a whole interview process and blah, blah, blah. Which maybe Jason put him through just to be mean, but we knew that Nick was going to do it. But I stayed at Big Finish 2 days a week. So I started in Cardiff in the June, and I finally left Big Finish. I think my last recording with them was probably the middle of November that year. So I was doing the 2 jobs, and I was driving back and forth from London to Cardiff, which is quite exhausting. And then after that, just very early December 2006 was when I made the move and went, right, now I have to leave my house and move up here and find a place to live in Cardiff, and lose my driving license on the same day because I went too fast. And I've been in Cardiff ever since, other than a very brief 3 years in Australia, which is a whole different ballgame. But yeah, and I stayed on Doctor Who and Sarah Jane, which is my baby. Love it. Loved working on Sarah Jane. Loved doing season 2 of Torchwood as well. In fact, Doctor Who is actually, ironically, the last thing I worked on. I as a script editor, my first script editing work was on season 2 of Torchwood, and I did that. And then I was supposed to cover for Lindsay. Lindsay Alford had done season 1 of Sarah Jane, and I was supposed to cover for her for about a month on season 2, and ended up being asked actually to do it full time. And then I did all of Sarah Jane from that point on, and just loved it. What a great show that was. Oh, just brilliant. And then at the same time, then I started doing Doctor Who, and I did the last 3 David Tennant episodes of Doctor Who as a script editor. So I did Waters of Mars and the final 2-parter. And they're the only 3 episodes of Doctor Who that I've actually got a credit on, even though I was involved with everything from Smith and Jones onward. Well, from Runaway Bride actually was the first thing that went into production while I was up here. So I was involved in everything. I was the only person, sort of, other than Russell and Julie, who was across all 3 shows and every aspect of all 3 shows, because I had to be for the worldwide stuff. And that was a nice position to be in, because it just meant everyone asked you questions about everything, and you'd go, oh, actually, they're doing that in Torchwood, or, oh, don't do that in Sarah Jane because Doctor Who's actually doing that in a few episodes' time. And I became sort of general pain in the arse to everybody because I knew everything. And I was doing all this work for Worldwide, and I was doing the shows, and it was brilliant. And I did that. Russell and Julie had left, and Stephen Moffat and Piers and Beth came in, and then Kara Skinner came in, and I left at the end of 2011. We'd lost Liz. Sarah Jane had come to an obviously end. We were starting up Wizards versus Aliens, and I just thought, you know what? I came up here really to work with Russell and Julie. They were my heroes, and that's why I did this move. And they've gone. Sarah Jane's gone. Torchwood's gone, and it's time for me to do something else. You know, I'd been there for nearly 6 years, and that's probably the longest job I'd ever had in my life. And so I thought, no, I need to get out of there. So I left there and I went back to freelance.
Okay. Sounds like you enjoyed working with Elizabeth Sladen.
Yeah. Well, I've known Liz for at least 20 years at that point. First time I met Liz was in 1984. in
Wow.
Chicago, where she introduced me to Sadie, who at that point was inside her tummy. And we've just been friends, and we work. Obviously, I worked with her at Big Finish. She was one of the first guest stars I ever got into a Big Finish, into a Benny. So she was a great supporter of Big Finish. We did our own Sarah Jane series for that. So yeah, she was very, very happy when I worked on Sarah Jane, because it gave her somebody who she knew and she felt knew her character. I think Liz, bless her, was very protective of Sarah Jane. And I think for that first season, she was up against an awful lot of people who didn't really know who Sarah Jane was. They were just working on that show. And she would say things like, I'm sorry, Sarah Jane wouldn't do that. And they would be thinking like, what do you mean Sarah Jane wouldn't do that? When you got 2 episodes, how do you know what Sarah Jane? And of course, she had this entire history and this love of this character. So when I came on with season 2, she immediately had someone who she could say, Sarah Jane wouldn't do that. Would she, Gary? And the would she, Gary was delivered in such a way that I wouldn't dare argue with her. And she, she's so meticulous. So she used to phone me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, because she was on set at 7 a.m. And I had, when you're working on a show that's actually filming, I made it my mission, whether I was supposed to or not, I don't know, but I would always be in the office at the point that they were on location starting filming, and I wouldn't leave the office till they'd finished. So I was doing 12-hour days, the same as they were, just stuck in an office. And she'd phone me at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd wait, my phone mobile would ring, and I'd answer it. And I think, well, I know who this is. Obviously, no one else is going to ring me at 3 in the morning. And she'd be there, bright and cheerful. Oh, darling, I'm just getting ready to go to set. The car's coming to pick me up in 2 hours' time. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I know it is. Well, what's the problem? If I'm awake, then you should be awake. Thank you. And she'd be, in the script, Sarah Jane says, but I think she's an and kind of person in this. Can I say and, not but? Yes. Yes, Liz, you can. Okay, I just have to get permission, because you know how it is, and which is absolutely true. At this stage in Doctor Who, unlike the 70s and 80s, where I think everyone just went boom, 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 do what you like, we have a rule that you didn't change scripts. So I would actually, that morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, when I got to the office, knowing that's a reasonably human time, would quickly phone Gareth or Phil or Joe or whoever's script it was and say, Liz wants to say and, not but. Do you have a problem with that? And they'd be going, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. Why are you phoning me? I go, yes, I've been doing this since 3. And she and I just laughed. We just laughed an awful lot. We laughed, the two of us, because we'd known each other. And she could be quite prickly and quite grumpy when she wanted to be. And I think it would be fair to say that if she wanted to vent at someone about something that was nothing to do with me, she would vent at me, and I would get the brunt of whatever annoyance, anger, frustration. And I'd sit there and go, that's fine by me. Use me as your punching bag, because you got this, you're running a show, you're leading the show, and you need someone to vent at. And she knew she could vent at me, because I wouldn't sit down and take it seriously and go, why is she shouting at me? Which anyone else on the crew or the kids or whatever would have done that. And so and then she'd phone me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh, darling, I'm so sorry about earlier today. You didn't mind, did you? And I'd be like, no, I didn't mind then. I kind of mind at 3 o'clock in the morning, but you want to shout at me at 10 o'clock in the morning, it's absolutely fine. And that was the kind of relationship we had. And I've known Sadie, her daughter, since before she was born. But I've certainly known Sadie on a regular basis since she was about 8. And I've known Brian, Liz's husband, for many years. And so, it was nice to work on a show with someone who I adored and got on really well with, and could be phoned up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I occasionally say to her and say, did she ever phone you at 3 o'clock in the morning? And Ross would go, oh, no, I tell her to phone you. And that's like, that one.
Unbelievable. Okay. Well, Mr. Russell, we're going on 2 hours here, and that's what I asked you for. And I'm wondering, did you want to take a break, or should we keep going?
I'm quite happy to keep going for as long as you are. I know
Okay.
you've got to go and pick the kids up, but as I
Yeah.
warned you weeks ago, if you don't shut me up,
Oh,
I
I'm not
keep.
gonna.
So,
I'm
so
not. Yeah,
feel
I'm
free to
not
go
gonna
ahead and
stop
shut
you.
up.
You're
Yeah,
doing wonderful, and you have no idea how much I appreciate this, because I know that people are curious. And what I wish is that you would write some books individually about what it was like working on Sarah Jane, what it was like working on Torchwood, what it was like working on Doctor Who. I would buy those,
I have been
but
asked. I have been asked to do that,
okay,
and I won't
okay,
because, and I don't mind saying this, I won't do it for the simple reason that betraying is the wrong word. I had an opportunity, I had a gift, I had this wonderful 6 years working on these shows because of Russell. And I don't think it's my story to tell. If anyone should write a book about all of that sort of stuff, that's Russell's job. And I'm a footnote in it. And I think it would be supremely egotistical of me, and I'm a supreme egotist, believe me, at the best of times, but I think it would be wrong for me to try and make out that my role in any of that stuff was in any way important enough to be in a book when you have the likes of Russell and Julie and Phil Collinson and people like that who they should be writing the books about the history and the making of these shows. So I've been asked more than once to write a book, have a book written about it. Someone said to me, "Oh, you don't have to do any of the writing. We'll just do a big long interview and we'll do it that way." And I just went, "No." That to me, that would be. I feel it would be a betrayal of Russell and his faith and his trust in me to do that. And it's not something he's ever said to me. He's never said, "Oh, don't write a book." But actually, if I was, I'd have that little phrase in the back of my head of him just going, "Oh, I'm going to kill you." So no, it would be wrong. It's not my story to tell. It's the only people who should be telling that story are the important people, which is Russell, Julie, and Phil.
okay, very good. Now, you've covered what it was like working with Elizabeth Sladen with the Sarah Jane Adventures. With Torchwood being a new Russell T Davies creation, it's my understanding as the script editor with Doctor Who in particular, you had to keep things straight with continuity and what have you. Now, with Torchwood being a new creation spinoff, um, was it? I'm trying to think of the right word. Was it easier to script edit Torchwood than Doctor Who?
Yes, because Doctor Who even then had in my head as a fan, and they would ask me for continuity comments. Although it was Stephen Russell, who's as big a fan as I am and knows as much as I do, if not more. But Doctor Who has that then what was it, 40-year history. Torchwood, as you say, is brand new, but it was still a difficult show to script edit. I did the second half of the second series. The first series I think is very good, but the characters I think in that first series, their interactions with each other are slightly all over the place. 1 minute one person's in love with somebody, the next minute they're not remotely, and you think, "Oh, hang on a minute, last episode," and that's all to do with just setting the show up. And by the second season, everything was much more. We'd worked out what didn't work in season one, and so we had a much easier plate for series two to sit down and go, these are our character arcs for series two. So in that respect, it was a lot easier to do. I think I wouldn't want to have arrived in Cardiff having never script edited television before, and someone had said, "Right, do season one of Torchwood." I think my head would have exploded. I will say that on my very first day in Cardiff, lovely Brian Minchin, who became my mentor while I was up there, who was the script editor of Torchwood, introduced himself and then just dumped this pile of scripts, which is like this big, on my desk and said, "What are you doing today?" And I said, "I don't really know." He said, "Fine, there's every script for Torchwood. Read them and get to know the stories, because that will be quite handy to have somebody who knows Torchwood really well, and you're going to need to know it for the BBC stuff and for the BBC Worldwide stuff anyway. And I sat in that first couple of days and I just devoured all of these Torchwood scripts. I hadn't seen any of Torchwood. They were halfway through filming that season. And I just read all the scripts. And as it turned out, I read about 4 scripts that were never made. And that was quite nice. And I sort of very quickly fell in love with Torchwood. I could see what it was about. I could see what Russell and Chris Chibnall were trying to do with this show. And then I went to a couple of tone meetings for various episodes. I think the first one I went to was Countryside. Yes. No, what's it called? Is it called Countryside? Yes, I think it is. Anyway, that was the first script tone meeting I went to ever. And that was for that episode of Torchwood. And I was like, oh yeah, I get this show. I like this show. It's my kind of show. And then I went to the launch for the first episode and watched it on the big screen and went, oh, this is brilliant. So I fell in love with Torchwood very, very quickly. So I was asking all the time, can I script edit an episode of Torchwood? Can I script edit an episode of Torchwood? So when season 2 came along, Julie Gardner said to me one day, you want to do Torchwood, don't you? And I said, yes. And she went, right, well, Brian's going to do the first 6 episodes. Why don't you do episodes 7 to 13? As it turned out, I didn't actually do all of them because Brian did a couple and Lindsay did one as well. But I got a good smattering. And we'd done this thing where Russell had come up with this brilliant idea where we were going to kill off Yanto and then bring him back as a living corpse. And so we were working on all these scripts where this happened. And then he came in one day and said, no, you need to change that. It shouldn't be Yanto, should it? It doesn't work with Yanto. Make it Owen. Make it the man who's hedonistic and absolutely in love with life. What an absolute bitch it will be for the man who's in love with life, who suddenly has no feelings and can't do anything. So we changed everything. And it was like, oh, and I found that really exciting to then work backwards through everything that had been set up and go, right, we take Yanto out and we put Owen in and make it him. And how does that, that whole thing with Tosh suddenly becomes very different because she's kind of in love with Owen and now he's a corpse. And so I got to play with those episodes. So I got to play with the episode where Owen has to deal with it. I got to play with the episodes where Tosh has to deal with it. I got to play with the episodes with the wedding. And then my favorite of all is I got to do the episode with all the flashbacks in where you see how everyone first met and came into Torchwood, which is Chibnall's brilliant fragments. I loved working on that script with him. So that was fun. I really enjoyed that. And then as I was coming to the end of that was when I was asked to do the second series of Sarah Jane. So I was very briefly doing both shows together, which is fine because I was at the same office. And I wasn't as familiar, actually, ironically, with Sarah Jane Adventures. I hadn't sat down and read all those first scripts back to back. I kind of flicked through them because there was no Sarah Jane merchandise at that point. It didn't start until we did season 2 anyway, which I think was probably a lot to do with my influence of nagging people and saying, we need to do Sarah Jane merchandise. So I then sat down and I watched the first series of Sarah Jane and went, oh, this is like classic Doctor Who. This has got that feel to it of classic Doctor Who. Right, I see what we're going for here. We're not going for a kid's show. We're going for Doctor Who as it was in the 1970s when Liz was doing it last time. I like that. There's no talking down to people. There's no patronizing people. There's no, oh, we're making a kid's show. We're making a show that isn't as unpleasant and violent as Torchwood and as twisty-turny as Doctor Who. We're just making a show that's going to go out at 5:15, so you have all those kind of restrictions on it, but we're not talking down to the audience. We're not doing stories that are any less deep and meaningful and important than a Doctor Who story. And I loved Sarah Jane Adventures for that. And working with Phil Ford on that, because he was the showrunner on that, was just amazing. And you know, I was talking to Phil 24 hours ago because we've stayed friends ever since. And it's just great. It's just wonderful.
Okay. Now, when I had asked you the open-ended question, where is Gary Russell? I may have said that was the only open-ended question, but I do have one more brief one, if it's okay. What is it like to script edit Doctor Who for television?
Are you asking me that question as in what is the job, Or are you asking me that question as in, what's it like being a Doctor Who fan who suddenly gets a chance to script edit his favorite TV show?
Yes.
Okay, well, the easy bit is the first bit,
Both,
which
please.
is as a script editor in my day, your job was Russell or Julie would turn around and say, "Oh, we're thinking this writer, this idea for a story. Go away and talk to them and see what they come up with." And then I'd work with the writer for a bit, and we'd work up a synopsis that might take a couple of weeks. Then I'd go back to Russell and Julie and Brian or Nikki or whoever was the producer of Sarah Jane at the time, and say, "Here's their storyline." And we'd all have a big meeting about it, and then they'd all have notes, and I'd go back to the writer and say, they love this, they don't like this, can we change this? Let's have another synopsis, go back, all right, yeah, let's get a script from that, boom, 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 bring them up for a meeting, we'll have a script meeting, boom, 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 I do lots of notes. And then the rest of the time, it's just you're back and forth. You're the middle person. You're the conduit for everybody. You're the conduit for the execs to the writer to the execs, the director to the writer and the execs. And as this goes on and on and on, you become the person that the makeup or costume people might want to talk to about something. So you're the person that knows everything about that script. So whereas in the Terence and Eric Sayward and Chris Bidmead era of Doctor Who, the script editor's job was to do a lot of rewriting and make it all fit. Now that's Russell's job as the showrunner. So the script editor is much more halfway between a diplomat and a marriage guidance counselor. But you're the information, you're the conduit for everyone else. You have to know. So if someone turns around to you and says, episode 6, scene 53, most people would go, oh, episode 6, scene 53 is. As a script editor, your job is to go, ching, yep, I know what you're talking about. I know every single line of that script. I know exactly what's going on, so that when Liz phones you up at 2 o'clock in the morning and says, and I say bang, not gosh, you know exactly what she's talking about. She doesn't have to tell me what scene number she's talking about. I have to know it. So that's imprinted in my head. So that's the job as I saw it. I was very protective of writers, probably a little bit too overprotective of the writers, but I saw my job as protecting the writers and the scripts from maybe a director or a producer wanting to change something. And I would go, that's not what the script is about. And occasionally you butt heads with people over that. But you know, that's the fun of it, really. And a lot of very long hours and never any weekends, because while everyone else is resting, that's when everyone says, all right, we can have a script meeting now because no one else is around and it's a Sunday afternoon. And I'll be sitting at home going, oh, okay, I'll be there in 20 minutes then. And I loved it. It was great. Script editing, particularly on Sarah Jane, was just phenomenal. As me being asked to be a script editor on Doctor Who, yeah, I mean, you know, what's going to be better than Russell T Davies asking you to come up and work on his shows, and sitting in an office in Cardiff and going, I'm working on Doctor Who and its spin-offs. Every single day I get up and think about Doctor Who and its spin-offs. Oh my God, this is what I've been wanting to do since I saw William Hartnell turn into Patrick Troughton. You know, that's the effect it had on me in 1966, and it's still having that effect on me now. I'm still getting excited when a script would come in from Russell or one of the other writers on Doctor Who and reading it and going, oh my God, this is going to be the best Doctor Who ever. Oh wait, I said that about last week's, but then last week's was the best Doctor ever until this one came up. And you know, it's like that. I just, and so many magical moments, you know, just, I so clearly remember reading the script of Midnight and just reading this script and just going, this is perfection. This is absolutely astonishingly wonderfully brilliant perfection. And you know, there was this Phil's Sarah Jane script about Clyde, where everyone turns against him and he ends up homeless, and reading that and just going, the worst thing of all, the scripts for the unmade season of Sarah Jane and reading The 13th Floor, and that was just the pinnacle of Sarah Jane. That script would have been the best episode, best story of the entire series, I think. And then when that never happened, and it was like, this is heartbreaking because it's such a good script. And then of course they used it in Wizards vs. Aliens, and it's great in Wizards vs. Aliens. It's a brilliant episode, works really well. But there'd only been a year and a half of Wizards versus Aliens when they did that. Whereas if we'd done it in Sarah Jane, we'd had 4 years of Clyde and Rani. And that had so much more, to me, powerful impact. And it was just a brilliant script. But then everything Phil wrote was brilliant. Everything Russell wrote was brilliant. You know, the two of them are just geniuses, I think, on that show. Yeah, so I was just a very happy little boy, age 48 or whatever. That was the only thing that Russell and I were kind of the only old people on these shows. Everyone else is in their 20s and 30s, you know, and Russell and I were like the old people, but he was an old person. He'll kill me for that, but he was the old person who was in charge. I was very far from being, you know, I'd come from Big Finish where I've been here at the top, and now I was on Doctor Who, and I was like 85th in order of importance, but I was in my mid-40s. So I felt a bit kind of like the sad old man that sat in the corner, and every so often someone should go up and give him a cup of tea and check he's still awake. Because everyone else is young. And I did feel that quite a lot, that occasionally people looked at you in a sort of, oh, that sad old man who's had no life and now he's here because he loves Doctor Who and he's working on these shows, bless him. And then sometimes I'd think, yeah, but you know what? I've got 10 years, 12 years more life experience than any of you have got. And I know how to deal with people, and I know how to deal with scripts, and I know how to deal with shit that goes on. And I know how to deal with execs when they're in bad moods and can help deflect them, and all of the young kids just didn't understand. And if someone exploded, whether it was a director or a cameraman or a whatever, got angry about something, you'd see all these people in their 20s and 30s go, I don't understand why we're being shouted at. And I'd sit there and go, this is how you deal with it. Don't worry, Dad will go in and sort it all out. But you know, it was lovely, and it was a good 6 years, a lot of fun. Next to DWM, second best job I ever did.
Okay, nice. Now, shifting back to Sarah Jane for just a second and final time here, the Sarah Jane Adventures television series. Did you ever have an opportunity to work with or on something with Nicholas Courtney?
Yeah, well, so Nick came up and did the end of season 2. He did the Bane episode in the end of season 2, which kind of, I wouldn't say it was my idea, but it certainly came out of a conversation between me, Russell, and Phil Ford. And of course I knew Nick, so I was able to talk to him and say, you know, they're going to come and ask you to do this, and it was lovely. I mean, I've known Nick for 35 years at that point, so again, it was lovely for him because there was someone on set that he knew, someone who would protect the character. It was lovely. And then we wanted to have him back the following year for the wedding episode, and he couldn't do it, which is a shame. But we would have had him back for that. You know, there's at least a couple of drafts of Gareth's script for the wedding episode where the Brigadier is in it. And then we realized Nick wasn't going to be available, so we had to write him out, which is a shame because that would have been, he would then have worked with David Tennant, which would have been really lovely. So yeah, working with Nick is always good.
Okay, very good. Okay, we're moving into the final segment here. I want to touch on Rose, but before that, I must ask about the 1996 television movie. I believe you wrote something about that.
I did the novelization, and I wrote the making of book.
Okay, so both of those. Okay, now with that coming right in the middle of the wilderness years, did you watch that when it came on? Were you excited about it? Do you wish that it had turned into a TV series? Any feelings on that?
Well, obviously I watched it because I felt like the only person in the UK that had some kind of attachment to it, because I'd written this novelization. I was like, suddenly I was the expert on the McGann TV movie before it ever went out, because I was the only person who'd seen the scripts and written this book. So I was very protective of it, I think. I loved it. I thought it was a great script. I thought it was a great production, actually. So I did like the TV movie. I just love Paul McGann. I just think he's phenomenal in it. And I think Daphne's brilliant too. was I disappointed it didn't go to a series? I wasn't surprised it didn't go to a series. Let's put it
Mhm.
that way. I think it would have made a good series. I think Phil, the producer, had lots of brilliant ideas, and I think it could have made quite an interesting show. But I wasn't surprised. I don't think. I think it came at the wrong time.
Mhm.
I think it should have come 3 years earlier, which is what Phil. I mean, Phil was planning this show sort of in 1992. He first went to the BBC with the idea, and I think if it had happened in time for the 30th anniversary, I think that would have been a very different thing, and we might well have got a full series out of it. I just think it happened to this kind of nebulous 1996. Nobody really cares about Doctor Who either in Britain or in America. The irony being, of course, that it bombed in America. It was sabotaged, really, I think, by the Roseanne thing. Whereas in the UK, it got phenomenal ratings. It got twice the ratings of any 80s Doctor Who got. And had it been made by the BBC outright, I think it would have gone to a series straight away because everybody watched it and loved it. But because it was the American thing, it just didn't happen. I learned a lot about that show when I was doing the making of book.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, is when I thought, yeah, I can see why in an American environment and the way American television is made and what people need from American TV, I could see why this was not something. You know, I think Phil certainly hoped it would go to a series, but I think there were a number of people on the American side of both Fox and Universal who had long since decided before it even went on air that it wasn't going to be a series. You could
Mhm.
tell that just from talking to them at the time. It was just a TV movie to them. For Phil, it was a backdoor pilot, and I think for the execs in the TV companies, it was just a movie of the week that was based on a British TV show that most of them had never heard of or seen. They just didn't understand it. Why is the police box? Well, how is it bigger on the inside? Well, it just is. It comes back to that thing that of me would have gone, but why? And I think that's what they were doing the whole time. They just didn't get Doctor Who, and if it wasn't for Phil Siegel and his enthusiasm, I suspect it would have been killed before it ever got shot. And I think
Wow.
his enthusiasm and his love for it and his passion for that project pushed it through. And I think his genius as well was the casting of McGann, which at least made the American TV networks execs sit up because they knew who Paul McGann was. And I think if he'd gone for any number of other people, that probably would never have been greenlit at all. I think the final bit of green lighting for it, certainly for Universal, was the casting of McGann. I think once he could say, I've got this actor attached to this project, they kind of went, oh, well, we'll make that then. That's going to be good. It was a fascinating book to do the making of, actually. Phil's brilliant. Phil's everything you'd ever want in a TV producer from a journalistic point of view, because he kept everything,
Mhm.
absolutely everything. The only thing he didn't keep, I could kill him for this, and I kept saying to him, I'm going to kill you for this, is he didn't keep call sheets. And as a result of not keeping call sheets, we still, to this day, 30 something years later, cannot identify the actor that played Grace's boyfriend, Brian. Nobody knows who that is because there's
What?
no paperwork with his name on it anywhere. It's the
What?
only thing that Phil has not got a record of. It's
What
so
is?
frustrating.
What is a cool sheet?
Call sheet, CALL, call sheet, is what the actors and crew get the night before every day.
Oh,
Tells them what they're going to shoot, who's going to be there, what locations they're on, and it's a daily thing. So it goes out the night before. So tomorrow, here's your call sheet for tomorrow, tells you what time to be, where you're going, blah, blah, blah. But it always lists all the actors required for that day. And therefore, if we had the call sheet for the day that the stuff in the theatre was shot, we'd have the name of the guy that played Brian, who was an extra. He was just an extra. But
right.
it's the kind of thing that, as a Doctor Who fan, is annoying that we don't know. And as a total anal retentive researcher, I'm that after all these years, I spent more time while I was writing that book trying to find who that actor was than anything else in that book, because it burned me that it was the one gaping hole in that thing. I had all the other extras, I had everything I needed, couldn't find out who played Brian. I even went to the agency that supplied all the extras in Vancouver, and they went, no, he didn't come from us. We don't know him. I'm sure he must have done, but nobody could ever tell me what poor actor. And this poor actor who gets quite a nice visual moment and he's important to the storyline and everything. And nobody knows who he is. He gets no credit at all. And he's probably sitting
Wow.
somewhere going, oh, yeah, I played Brian in the Doctor Who TV movie in 1996. It's like, could you please come forward and tell us who you are? But, you know, I loved writing that book, and working with Phil on it was an absolute pleasure and a joy, because he was just so enthusiastic. So for nothing was too much bother for Phil Siegel when we were doing that book. He just, yeah, it was good fun. It was a good time. Writing that book was a good period of my life. Really enjoyed it.
And that's the making of the 1996 TV movie.
Regeneration, and you can't buy it anymore.
Right, Regeneration.
It's called Regeneration, and it's the making of the TV movie, and it's superb.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah, that
the book is beautifully designed as well. It just looks, Gary Gillett designed it. It looks amazing. Looks like no other TV making of book. It's fantastic. And Phil just had everything. So everything you needed was, you know, every design sketch, every version of every script, going right back to sort of 1992 and everything. He kept everything. It was brilliant.
You know, I've looked to buy a copy of Regenerations, and that book is extremely expensive if you can ever find one. It's very, very rare.
Yep. And I gave all my copies away, and now I sit down and think, if I had that, I could put that on eBay and pay.
I was just going to ask, do you happen to have a case of those in your attic or something?
I literally have one hardback and one paperback. I only got the paperback about 3 years ago. Someone in Gallifrey gave me a copy of the paperback version. I didn't even know.
Nice.
And that's it. Yeah. I've long since thought someone should reprint it, but they never will.
Okay. Now you also wrote the novel of that film, which was written by I believe Matthew Jacobs.
Yes.
And yeah, I had an opportunity of speaking with him and his director, Vanessa. You're very nice people.
Really
Yep.
lovely.
Yep. Now, were you able to take that story and add your own elements to it, to where you brought it more into the way you wanted it to be told?
No, not really, because that's not your job as a novelizer. You've still got Matthew's script and things like that. My problem that I had was I was writing it while they were shooting it. So
Really?
I didn't see it. I didn't see it at all. I saw, they sent me over one scene that had been shot, which was the scene where Grace is sprayed with the acid by the master inside the back of the ambulance. And I saw that scene. So that, oh, that's what Grace looks like. That's what Eric Roberts' master looks like when he's Bruce. That's what E.G. looks like. So that was my visual reference to that. I had some photographs of Paul McGann, and that's all I had, and the script. And
Okay.
it wasn't even the finished shooting script. So yeah, I wrote that whole book before they finished filming.
Wow.
Which is an interesting way of doing novelization. So it meant that it gave me the opportunity, for right or wrong, that I could, when you're writing a novelization of something, you can't just do a he said, she said version of the script, because that's just dull and boring and doesn't work. Again, you're taking a script, which is a TV medium, and putting it into prose, completely different medium. So you have to play with things. You move scenes around, you invent new characters to be your focus for telling something. I remember putting in something that Grace had this little Mickey Mouse statue on her desk, and that became a thing, so that every time I could mention the Mickey Mouse statue, and you'd immediately know who the characters were in this scene. It's little tricks like that, all the things I learned from reading Malcolm Hulke Doctor Who novels years ago. And the biggest one for me was I had no idea what the TARDIS looked like, absolutely none. And the script describes it as being like a cathedral, but
Okay.
it also talks about it being a bit like a university kind of Oxford or Cambridge style thing. So I took that quite literally, and so I invented all these cloisters and people walking down long corridors, and they'd look up and there'd be a sky above them, you know, and the TARDIS was showing you planets, and I just made the TARDIS 100 times big, because I had no idea what it would actually look like, because no one gave me any pictures. The only time I had a problem was in the sequence where McGann gets the apparatus put on his eyes, from like the thing from Clockwork Orange, and the Master forces his eyes open with this, and the script just says he puts a device on the Doctor's head, and I was like, this is important to the plot. I don't know what this device looks like. So I went back to the BBC and said, look, I'm lost. I actually need some help on this from America. I need to know what this device is. Can someone describe it for me? And the next thing I know is, and this is in the days of faxes, I get faxed over the design sketch for the apparatus. And I go, right, now I understand it. Boom, 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 write the scene. Well, finish the book goes off, gets published, TV movie comes out, boom, boom, boom. A year later, I'm doing a convention in Manchester in the UK with Philip Segal. First time I met him. And he went, oh, you're the guy that did the novelization. And I went, yeah, and we're chatting away. And he said, was it really helpful, all that stuff that I sent over? And I went, what stuff? And he went,
Oh,
I sent over to you a 400-page document of every design, including all the TARDIS designs, everything. And I went, the only thing I ever got was the eye apparatus. And he went, oh, when you asked for that, I sent everything over. And of course, what it turned out is that the BBC had decided in their infinite wisdom that even though I'd signed 10,000 NDAs and was contracted to do this thing, they didn't trust that I might not give these 400 pages out to every bloody Doctor Who fan in the world. So they didn't send them to me. And Philip, knowing that I wasn't going to be able to see the finished thing, did everything in his power. So I had every visual thing possible, and the BBC didn't give it to me. And so we bonded over his frustration and annoyance at that point that he'd done all this work for me that they hadn't let me see. And that's where we became friends. And then I saw him at a convention about 6 months later in Chicago, my first Chicago convention, and we were doing a signing together. I was signing copies of the book. He was signing anything that goes. And somebody came up with a photograph of Daphne and Paul leaning on the TARDIS. And Phil was signing it, and I looked at it. I said, I love that photograph. And Phil just went, you see that thing there? That's the emblem off a Volkswagen Beetle, just flipped over and sprayed. And he said, oh, and that is, and he started listing all the things on the TARDIS console and where they came from. And I said, you should write a making of book. And he went, no, you should write a making of book. Bang. And that's where Regeneration started, because of that conversation about that photograph.
wow.
It was just lovely. And we just, had the next 2 or 3 years, we were just great mates, and we hung out and we did the book, and it was brilliant. Okay. I love the TV movie. I've got a lot of passion for it and a lot of fondness for it.
Now that is wonderful. That very interesting. So writing that novel wasn't quite your first rodeo at writing a Doctor Who novel, right? You did.
No, I'd done at that stage I'd done 1 new adventure and 2 missing adventures for Virgin. So the TV movie was my 4th ever book.